Good evening, everyone. I'm Judge Andrew Napolitano in for Charles Payne tonight, and you're watching Making Money. A deposition from Hillary Clinton's chief of staff at the State Department shows the Democratic candidate intended to use her personal email right from the get-go. We've got all the details for you tonight. And federal prosecutors have filed suit to seize the life insurance policies of the San Bernardino shooters. We'll break it down for you. Plus, more economic unrest in Venezuela. The South American country is a living example of the failure of socialism and why we cannot let that happen in the United States. But first, breaking news. The State Department admitted today that a, quote, deliberate request was made to delete a portion of the December 2nd State Department press briefing when our very own colleague James Rosen asked about secret negotiations between the Obama administration and Iran.
James, I have no new information for you today on the timing of when there were any discussions with any Iranian officials.
Let me try it one last way,
Okay.
Jen, and I appreciate your indulgence.
Sure.
Is it the policy of the State Department where the preservation of the secrecy of secret negotiations is concerned to lie in order to achieve that goal?
James, I think there are times where diplomacy needs privacy in order to progress. This is a good example of that. There are remaining concerns that we have, as you all are familiar with, whether it's their involvement in support of the regime in Syria or humanitarian issues, and so that has not changed that.
The Obama administration says we...
That was the transcript in question. Clearly, you can see the edits made to the video. The spokesperson for the State Department, former Admiral John Kirby, responded today. Take a listen.
Well, I feel like we did due diligence. We did take a look at this. We did try to find out what happened. And frankly, we did learn quite a bit, right? We learned that there was a deliberate request, that this wasn't a technical glitch. This was a deliberate request to excise video. And as I said, I said it this morning to the staff, I don't find that to be an appropriate step to take.
Let's bring in our panel to discuss this. Adam Goodman, Ford O'Connell, and Richard Grinnell. Richard, to you first. You were once the chief spokesman for Ambassador John Bolton when he was the United States ambassador to the UN. Have you ever seen anything like this, where the State Department tries to rewrite history by excising a dramatic statement that a spokesperson made in a televised news conference and claiming it never happened?
Yeah, it's unbelievable. No, I've never seen this. I spent 8 years at the State Department as a State Department spokesperson. This would never have happened under the Bush administration. First of all, there's a whole host of hostile media who would be watching this, who would be jumping. I can tell you that spokespeople regularly have to look at the transcripts and make some sort of determination about whether or not you say something is inaudible, for instance, on a transcript. Right. Sometimes you can't quite hear what's going on. So the spokespeople have to manage the transcripts. They manage the transcripts timing, whether or not to bring in people immediately to get it out there. Jen Psaki was in charge. Right. She is the one who is in charge of the transcripts. And let me be very clear. Either Jen Psaki ordered this editing or she approved this editing. There is no other possible way.
Adam, you are a professional communications expert. What do you do if your client has said something embarrassing on air? Do you pretend it wasn't said?
You don't lie about it, number one. I mean, I'm sitting here, Judge, shaking my head as I'm listening to this, as they try to equate diplomacy with an excuse for not telling the truth. I've never heard anything like this. You put it out there. And the worst thing about all this, Judge, is that this deal, the nuclear Iran deal, really stinks from the beginning. I mean, we're giving money, billions of dollars back to a nation that supports terrorism. We're, in a sense, justifying continuing to support a sinking ship in foreign policy as opposed to turning to building a new one. And I think today's is just an example of a system that's out of control, of government that's not telling the truth, right, and going right to the impatience of the American people looking for better from those who represent us.
So, Ford, here's the backstory for those of us, for those watching now. Ben Rhodes, who was the president's second in command with respect to the negotiations with Iran, told a New York Times reporter, New York Times Magazine, that in fact he did lie to the Congress and to the American public during the course of the negotiations in order, quote, to temper irrational fears that members of Congress have about the people that are running the Iranian government. Now it comes out that the same State Department about which he says he lied is trying to rewrite history, and the very decent, very admirable former Admiral John Kirby is caught in the middle of this, and he admits that this stuff happened. Have you ever seen this before?
Absolutely not. It's disgusting. It's a big deal. Also understand, and hats off to James Rosen for his persistence. Understand, though, what happened here is Jen Psaki actually told the truth. That's what they were covering up, and then they admitted it was a cover-up. They were actually lying about a cover-up when someone went off the reservation from the State Department and actually basically told the truth. The job of the State Department was to manipulate the media about the Iran deal because it stunk to high heavens, and essentially the administration wanted to get it through no matter what.
Richard, shouldn't the American public be deeply concerned about a government that openly lies to it?
Yeah, not only should they be concerned about that, but I think this is a larger issue about President Obama's political appointments. Most of them have not been subject matter experts, especially at the State Department, especially when it comes to national security issues. You look at Ben Rhodes, who's a creative writing guy. You look at Jen Psaki. Neither one of these people who had top communications jobs had any experience with foreign policy up to this point. So putting someone in these positions just politicizes the very serious issue of foreign policy and national security. The Foreign Service Organization and leadership at the State Department would never allow this to happen under a Republican administration. If you're not a subject matter expert, they go crazy. But in these instances, they allow it to happen because someone is a liberal, someone is a partisan Democrat. They allowed these positions to be filled by people who are absolutely not qualified. Jen Psaki was not qualified. That's why she made these mistakes. How can she think she's going to get away with it?
Adam, how does this enter the presidential campaign? What can we expect to hear from Donald Trump? Can imagine what Trump's going to say, and how will Hillary Clinton react to this? She once ran the State Department that now admits it lied.
It's amazing, Judge, the strength that Hillary Clinton had going into this campaign, foreign policy chops, may actually turn out to be her Achilles heel. Iran, Yemen, Benghazi, and now this, a State Department that, seemingly has maybe a culture of doing this kind of thing routinely. What Donald Trump's going to do, listen to what he's called for just in the Iran deal. Right. He said, instead of negotiating with a terrorist-supporting nation, what we should do is hit them where it hurts, in the oil fields and in the pocketbook. And I think that's where the American people are, Judge.
Gentlemen, the bigger question is if they lied about the Iran deal and they got caught up in this cover-up because James Rosen was persistent, right. What other big item deals have they actually lied about and covered up? And that could be the real election turning point if we find out that there were a lot of other things, not just the Iran deal.
It's a great comment, and the bitter irony is that earlier today, President Obama made comments about how the conservative media, in his view, distorts his presidency. Take a listen.
Their basic story is America's working class, America's middle class, families like yours, have been victimized by a big, bloated federal government run by a bunch of left-wing elitists like me. And the government's taking your hard-earned tax dollars and it's given them to freeloaders and welfare cheats, and we're strangling business with endless regulations, and this federal government is letting immigrants and foreigners steal whatever jobs Obamacare hasn't killed yet. I haven't, turned on Fox News or listened to conservative talk radio yet today, but I've turned them on enough over these past 7.5 years to know I'm not exaggerating in terms of their story.
Well, he made a very nice summary of a Donald Trump-like argument about how the big, fat federal government takes too much money, regulates too much liberty, and destroys too much prosperity. Adam, what do you think?
As I'm listening to the president, I'm trying to think where I disagree with him. Almost everything he stated seemed to be true. We've been drifting, Judge, as a nation, as we know, for the last 8 years under the president. We just have, and which is why people are really down the mouth about where we are and they're demanding better and more of where we need to go. This is where Donald Trump has a real opening. This is what I call a head versus heart election. The head says, well, maybe we just stick with the system, those who have the experience and can hit the ground running, know the ropes in Washington, versus the heart, which says we've had enough. We only feel anxious and impatient about what's been going on. We're getting downright angry, and we want to do something different. And what do we have to lose? What's the downside in terms of what we now see the president making fun of, which actually has a lot of veracity and truth?
Ford, can Donald Trump bore into these issues, or is he going to stick with the personality and historical assaults on Hillary and her husband?
Well, I think that we're in a personality-driven era of politics, but I think that there's a lot of meat on the bone here because I do think that the president eloquently summed up the facts of the 8 years of his presidency. A $19 trillion debt, lowest workforce participation since the 1970s, the fact he doesn't want to enforce immigration laws. So I think the president, conservative media is not distorting this. The question is, can Donald Trump find a way to bring these facts into the emotional aspect of what this election is, which Adam perfectly summed up as, do you want to continue with government as usual? And if so, what's in it for you? Because if not, you're going to have to go in a new direction.
Got it. Richard, I got about half a minute. Are you surprised the president waded into the presidential campaign before either of the nominees is formally chosen?
It's really sad. I mean, ever since his re-election, he's gotten even more political than he was. It seems to me when you're in your second term, you should really begin to get rid of the partisanship, stop the politics, and be governing for everyone's sake. And President Obama's just never done that.
Got it. Gentlemen, thanks very much for joining us. Coming